Welcome back, players. I'm Jack with ThreeSixCancel, and this is Cocoa the Weiss Cat, and we are finally here. This is the fourth and final video in our tutorial series. We've taught you what Weiss Schwarz is, how to play it, and what it feels like to play. So now we're going to teach you the final piece, how to build your very own Weiss Schwarz deck. So obviously, we know that Weiss is divided into sets and expansions that each have different source material from anime, games, manga, and even light novels. Our objective for this video is to show you how to take the hundreds of cards from each of these sets and build the deck you want to play with. So in the minutes to follow, we'll break down what constitutes a deck in Weiss, break down some basics of deck building, and then give you some general tips. How you build your deck for any trading card game is obviously up to personal choice when it comes down to it. There are no right or wrong answers. Now, there are some rules to follow if you want your deck to be tournament legal, but for the most part, it's going to be up to you. So we'll be offering some general tips and guidelines that can apply to any deck building process, so while we're giving you some pointers, get creative. Okay, let's jump into it. The most logical place to start here is what constitutes a legal Weiss Schwarz deck. We went over this in some previous videos, but let's do a quick refresher. First, a Weiss Schwarz deck is exactly 50 cards, no more and no less. Second, you can have up to 4 copies of any one card in your deck. This applies to cards that have the same name, but are actually different cards, like Promised Pendant from Nisekoi, or Mother's Rosario from SAO. Some cards say that you can run as many of them as you like in one deck, like Predation Titan from AOT. And obviously, this takes precedence over what's normal. Third, a Weiss Schwarz deck can have no more than 8 climaxes. Now, you can run less, but to my knowledge there's no reason to, unless you're just trying to lose as quickly as possible. And fourth, a deck must be comprised of cards that are all legal to play together. As we know, you can't mix different expansions in Weiss. Kill la Kill and Gurren Lagann are both made by Trigger, but you can't play them together. But you can play different sets from the same expansion together just fine. For example, SAO has a ton of individual sets that can all be played in the same deck. Though there is an extra booster for Gun Gale SAO that just came out, and it's from an alternative timeline or something, I don't know. The point is, it's not the same cast and it can't be mixed together with other SAO. Generally, it's pretty obvious what can and can't be played together, but here are some quick FAQ answers on that just in case. Kantai Collection has an extra booster for the Abyssal Fleet. It is legal to play them together, but there's not much reason to. The Fate series has Unlimited Blade Works, Unlimited Blade Works 2, and Fate Zero. All of these can be played together, but cannot be combined with any of the Prisma Ilya Khalid liner sets. And while Love Live has several sets, any Love Live Sunshine set cannot be mixed with regular Love Live. Okay, so those are the basic rules of what constitutes a legal Weiss Schwarz deck. From here, it's up to you. You can build your deck with whatever cards you want as long as you're following those basic rules. But like I said, we'll provide you with some tips beyond that about deck building, and they're not gospel by any means. I'll be throwing some numbers at you and some guidelines, but they're not set in stone. By all means, experiment and see what works for you. But anyway, that's enough ass covering from me. Let's get into it. So to kick this off, we'll start with some general characteristics of a Weiss deck. We already know what makes a legal deck, but what makes a deck? You know what I mean? Well, most decks, no matter what their theme is, follow some general guidelines that, while not based in any rules or set in stone, help the deck run smoothly. Let's start with some basics. First, a deck generally includes the following. 1. A diverse toolbox of level 0s. 2. Some sort of level 1 combo to gain advantage. 3. A mid-game that helps you prepare for the final turns and holds you over. And 4. A level 3 with some sort of primary finisher or combo. Starting at level 0, let's break it down. So level 0 is generally the largest part of a deck. You'll always want to start the game with some level 0s you want to play, so running enough of them is essential, but we'll get into numbers later. But generally, a deck's level 0 is a decent mix of beaters, utility, and back row. For your front row, you'll want a mix of level 0s that get extra power, ones that can run around, and ones that can deal with your opponent's problem characters. You don't have to have all 3, but most decks will have trace elements of at least some. You'll also want some characters that help you set up for that important transition into level 1. Utility level 0s are the ones we talked about that can either search in some way when they're played, or bond with other characters. They're also cards that can help you solve problems on your opponent's stage. Take this Viral for example. He's a utility addition to my Gurren Lagann deck. On play, I can pay 1 and pitch 1 to salvage a character, and he's also a clock bomb. Now, a lot of utility cards aren't so multi-purposed, but you get the idea. Then you have back row characters, like Assisters and Brainstormers. Your back 2 slots are there, and it's important to remember to utilize them. And it's worth mentioning that just about every deck in Weiss Schwarz will run a Brainstormer in some form. Brainstormers and assisters often have other helpful abilities in addition to beefing up your characters and getting you free cards, so don't forget about them. And remember, back row characters are important, but they definitely shouldn't make up more than half of your level 0. One final tip about level 0. Remember that these characters don't need any color to be played, so it's very common to put a level 0 character in your deck that isn't within your primary colors. Just don't go overboard and lock yourself out of your game plan. No matter how you mix them, your level 0 should be full of cards that can stick around for multiple turns, gain you some sort of advantage, or help you prep for level 1. And level 1 is what we'll talk about next. We mentioned that the core of level 1 is your level 1 combo. Of course, we're talking about a climax combo. A lot of players will tell you that level 1 is where the game really kicks off, and executing your combo is generally where your deck will gain its momentum. About 95% of Weiss decks have some sort of advantage engine or big combo at level 1. Whether it be searching and salvaging characters, building extra stock, drawing cards, or gaining a ton of extra power, your level 1 combo is where your deck really shows what it's all about. Now, not every deck has a level 1 combo, but this is where most decks will stabilize, or to borrow a term from another card game, hit their curve. But what else is in the level 1 mix? Well, generally, aside from the combo, there are 2 other components. First, another value for cost level 1 that can encore, suicide, or do some other useful ability to help you round out your lineup. And second, a lot of decks choose to run some sort of level 1 backup depending on how their lineup is. Keep in mind that most decks will be playing their level 1 characters up until they hit level 3. So however you decide to build your level 1, make sure it's going to hold you over until you can make some level 3s hit the board. And I hear you. But Jack, what about level 2? Well, the truth is level 2 characters just don't get too much love. If you've ever taken a look at some deck lists, you'll notice that level 2 is generally the smallest part of any deck. And don't worry, we'll talk about numbers when we wrap this part up. But here's the thing, level 2 is a very short part of the game, not in the sense that it may be the level you spend the least time at, but it's the shortest window where level 2 characters make the ideal play. Obviously, you can't play most of them until you're level 2, and when you hit level 3, it's pretty unlikely that you'll want them in your front row instead of your level 3 game, and on top of that, they're costly. Many of them cost 2 stock to play, which is the same as many level 3s. On top of that, many level 2 climax combos require stock to activate, and to put the cherry on top, most newer sets have very easy to use early plays. So level 2 is basically a pseudo level 3 for some decks, and that's why I call this part of the game the mid-game transition, and a lot of what happens here is preparation. If you can execute your level 1 combo again during the mid-game, that's great, but here is where some cards like level 2 back rows that have other utility abilities, along with an assist, some techie level 2 backups, and of course, early plays, really shine. Like I said, you'll be mainly playing early plays in some of your level 1s at this stage of the game. An early play frontline or changes with a nice level 2 assist in the back row can really ride you through to level 3 without too much investment. And this is good because you're mainly saving for your finishing game. When you hit level 3, you might not live another turn to try to kill your opponent, so you'll want to lay down your level 3 game without worrying about how you'll afford it. But what are you laying down? So the level 3 game in any deck usually has 3 components. First, your primary finisher. This is generally where players will put their second climax combo, since 90% of strong finishers are linked to one. Your primary finisher, or endgame for all you Marvel fans out there that just saw that movie, is your ideal front row play to deal the most possible damage to your opponent. Again, this can come in many forms, like reverse burn, clock kicking, or cancel burn, but there's probably going to be 4 characters in your deck that do more damage than others. The second part of your level 3 is your utility. In addition to their primary finisher, a lot of players will run other level 3s that either do less damage but require less investment than their primary finisher, or other characters that do things like make your finishers work better or mess with your opponent's stage or deck. Some sets also have more defensive level 3s available to them, which can also fit this role. And of course, we already talked about the last part of your level 3 lineup, which are your early plays. Not all decks will run early plays, but a decent percentage do. Most early plays will do things like heal, draw you cards, or do extra damage, and all of this is still good once you hit level 3, especially considering that it'll be pretty rare that you'll be able to play 3 level 3s to the front row and execute their resource-intensive climax combo. Generally, your finishing field will be 1 or 2 of your primary finishers, and either an early play or a supporting level 3. Some sets also have back row level 3s that have really strong support abilities, but most sets have at least 6 different level 3 characters, so how you choose to close the game is really up to you. Okay, so that's what you can basically expect to want at every level. I know we got a little bit in depth there, but it's really tough to talk about deck building without going into a little detail about what you want at each stage of the game. We kind of went over the basic structure of the deck and what most players choose to build that structure with, but naturally, there are variations. Some decks are more centered around executing a certain combo that may be more cumbersome or less consistent, but devastating when it goes off. So they may emphasize choices that give them the needed utility to make it happen, instead of playing a more balanced game plan. My Megamine Explosions deck is a great example of that, and if you want to check that out, there's a link in the description. And other decks may play a way more defensive style, with lots of back row level 3s or softer finishers. Still others emphasize the mid-game a lot more, and try to deal a lot of damage really fast by making their decks more bottom heavy with a lot of extra soul earlier in the game, and some decks are just plain silly. And of course, who could forget about the classic waifu deck? But no matter how, why, or who you build your deck with, these ideas will generally hold true. But Jack, you say again, you still haven't answered my first question about building my deck. Just cut the bullshit and tell me how many of each level character is good to run. Alright, fine. But I won't tell you. Instead, I'll do what any good card player will do, and I'll show you some nice Microsoft Excel generated data. So check this out. This chart is the result of my sampling of 100 different Weiss Schwarz decks. And these are the average numbers I came up with. Or rather, the numbers Excel told me were average after rounding. Now, I didn't sample just any 100 Weiss decks, and I didn't just sample 100. For this video, I checked a few different Weiss blogs, tournament results, and deck building sites, and aggregated 100 different deck lists that were marked as placing or tournament winners. I actually took a fairly random sample twice, so that was 200 total placing deck lists. I also did a completely random sample of the first few pages of my two favorite deck building websites. Between the first and the second sample, there wasn't too much difference, but the second sample did lend itself to smoother rounding, and while the random sample I did wasn't quite the same, there still wasn't too much variation. Now, if you would gather some data yourself, it's very possible that you could come up with different numbers, but I'm pretty confident you wouldn't get anything too wildly different. Now, I will say that this kind of represents a snapshot of placing deck lists from about 2017 to mid-2019, and the metagame may very well change by the time you're watching this video. For example, lately we've been seeing many decks lean toward an even larger level 0 and a smaller level 1, while increasing the diversity of their level 3 game. While 2 years ago, there was a lot less invested in heavy burn damage, and people's endgame revolved a lot more around healing and defensive options. But I'm still pretty confident that these numbers won't be so far off that they'll be a bad place to start when you're building your deck. Now, one last thing to mention here is that in my samples, I tried to get as much set variation as I could, so that I had a representation for at least 75% of English sets, and no one set was more than 10%. And with some tournament results, that was kind of hard. So I found myself placing some deck lists aside for the second sample if I found, say, AOT, SAO, Bang Dream, or Sunshine was climbing too high in representation as I looked at the results. And it's important to say that every set will have its own reason to play more or less of any given level card, and just in case I wasn't backpedaling enough, I want to put it out there that I'm not one of those people that can look at data and know exactly how to analyze it in an advanced way. I took some samples, plugged them into an Excel sheet, and did what they teach you to do in middle school math classes. And in the process of getting the samples and making final decisions on how to present my data, I used some methodology I learned in a college class called Research Methods. I got a B in that class, and I was pretty happy with it, but I did my best with what I knew how to do, and judging it against my knowledge of the game in general, these numbers made sense to me. So take them as you will, with a grain of salt, and of course, feel free to do your own research. Alright, now we talked about numbers and game plan. And before that, we went over what made a legal deck, so now there's not a ton of heady stuff to go over, unless you wanted to get really heady and talk about what constitutes card advantage, good stock numbers, and how to evaluate individual cards. And I don't. So instead of that, I want to move to the end game of this video with some final tips and thoughts for deck building. First, consistency is key. When you're building a deck, try to pick the cards you really like or think will make your deck work, and run them as 4-of, since that's the maximum amount of duplicate cards you can have in any one deck. I'm not saying you have to run 4 of every card you choose, but if you fill your deck with 2-ofs and 1-ofs, you probably won't find what you need when you need it. Second, don't overdo it on colors. Most Weiss Schwarz decks are no more than 2 colors with a minor splash for a third one, or 1 or 2 cards. Remember, don't be afraid to splash in level 0s that are out of your colors, but make sure as you're taking damage and putting cards into your clock that you'll be able to put the colors in that you need. Third, keep your climax combos under control. 95% of Weiss decks run 2 or less. Running more than that can really ruin your opportunity to execute the ones you want when you want to. My Aaron waifu deck runs 3, and it's pretty inconsistent, but it's also kind of a meme deck, so it's not a great example of how to build a deck. But if you want to see something a little less serious and kind of interesting in terms of decks you can make with one of the biggest sets in Weiss out there, check out that video, also in the description. Also, I'd almost never run 2 climax combos that are executed during the same level. I just think that makes any deck way too inconsistent unless the set is specifically designed to do just that, and to my knowledge, at least in English, none are. Finally, I'll end by recommending that you keep your costs in check. Don't pack your deck with characters that are costly to play and expensive to use unless your deck can generate the stock for it. On any given turn, you'll generate 3 stock, and between having to play characters that cost stock and using abilities that cost stock, loading your deck up with a bunch of characters that are resource intensive can leave you high and dry. Try to limit your deck to 1 or maybe 2 big resource intensive combos, and don't make your whole level 1 lineup cost the stock to play and use. Remember kids, the best things in Weiss are free. Alright, so that concludes our building tips players. We started by going over what constitutes a legal deck in Weiss Schwarz, then we gave you some information on how different levels play into your game plan and how to integrate those ideas into building a deck, and finally we closed out with some general guidelines. And when you're sitting down with some cards in front of you, choosing what to put into your stack of 50, this should be enough to get you started. But how do you get started? Well, this is the last thing we'll cover, how to actually get started building a Weiss deck. So first things first, you'll need to pick a set. And in the current year, there are plenty of online databases for cards and card sellers. A quick Google search without me plugging any one in particular will net you some good results. Or alternatively, you can just pick out your favorite character and build a deck around them, if they're featured in Weiss of course. And don't worry, Weiss has plenty of your esports top pick waifus covered. You can look at some card databases and see what kind of cards your character has featured, or if you're looking to build a deck inside a set in general, just page through some cards in your favorite database. Weiss Schwarz's official site, ws.tcg/en, has all the English Weiss cards listed. You can search by character, set, or any other characteristic depending on where you want to start. Alternatively, you could get your hands on one of the trial decks sold for different sets, and buy packs or singles to sculpt it into something better. But of course, if you're looking to buy from a physical location, you can always use the Weiss Schwarz website store locator, and on top of that, you can always give your local game store a call. Even if you're not a regular or haven't been to a card shop around you, just get on the phone and ask if anyone there plays Weiss, or if they sell Bushiroad products. Even if they don't sell it off the shelves, many card shops who deal with any Bushiroad content will order and even pre-order boxes for you. And of course, this leads us to boxes. Let's face it, Weiss Schwarz is just another form of cardboard crack, and cracking packs is something that calls to each of us deep down in that monkey part of our brains. You can always order booster boxes from your favorite set and just rip them open and see what comes out, and then make a deck out of it. But that's probably the most expensive option. But hey, it's not about the prize, it's about the chase. Now, when it comes to going to physical card shops, there's something I want to put out there that's a little more off topic from deck building. If you do build a deck with your friends, I'd actually recommend getting involved with some of the Weiss Facebook communities or Discord channels for the game. And more than that, if you want to hang out and play the game with your friends, go out and show off your power levels in public. You don't have to go to McDonald's and play with anime cards, but going to your local game store for a night out with your buddies, playing some cards and then maybe getting a bite is a fun time. And more importantly, it gives Weiss some showing in the wide gaming world. It's no secret that Weiss Schwarz has a smaller community than some other big card games out there, so I'm all about going out there and playing where people can look at it and say, hey, that looks cool. What game is that? Because that's how a good chunk of people ran across this video series. Maybe even you were that person who saw some gamers playing Weiss and decided to go do some research for yourself. Because ultimately, that's why I made these videos. I just wanted to make some videos for people who were interested in getting into Weiss Schwarz. I thought anyone deserved at least that much. I did this once before in 2017 when I launched this channel, and it took me months to make, but I did make it, for the same reason I did now when I remade the series in 2019, now that I have some video editing and production experience. I still love Weiss, and it's still a big part of my hobbies and where I get my fun. As a veteran of many card games, I think Weiss is one of the most fun I've played, and it's certainly brought me a lot of joy, and it's my hope that Weiss can bring you players a lot of enjoyment as well. Alright folks, this is it. This is the end of our tutorial series. With these 4 videos under your belt, you've got an excellent foundation to start playing the game, or at least I hope so. But if you didn't hit one of the videos, check the description if you have more questions on how to play, and if not, check out the rest of our channel. I make deck techs, post live games, talk about sets, do tournament reviews, and just make Weiss content in general. Give it a look, because I really enjoy making it. And of course, thanks for sticking with us for our tutorial. Good luck with Weiss, and Coco and I wish you and yours the best as you pick up some cards and go play Weiss Schwarz for yourself. And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.